Hey, welcome everybody.
So I'm Sara Brumfield with From the Page, and I'm here today with Ben, my partner. And we wanted to tell you what we've learned over a decade of running crowdsourcing projects. That's kind of the goal today. Next slide. We will send out a resource list with links to everything we mentioned in today's webinar and a recording. We do have a couple, oh, we didn't update these. Skip this slide, keep going. And we'll post our upcoming webinars in the chat as we go along so that you can see some of the other things we have coming up. We'll send out a resource list with links to everything we mentioned today and a recording sometime in the next day or two. It takes us a little while to get it processed and posted. So what we're going to talk about today, what is From the Page, the platform we happen to run, what is effective crowdsourcing, and the pieces that go into that. Thinking about volunteers, selecting material, developing your transcription instructions, kicking off your project, keeping your volunteers engaged, and then we'll have a discussion, answer questions, things like that, and Ben will kind of give us a walkthrough of different parts of From the Page.
All right, so let's get started. As Sara mentioned, she and I run a platform for crowdsourcing manuscript transcription, OCR correction, and other kinds of things related to archival documents. Now, there's a lot of different kinds of tasks that crowdsourcing projects can be run on. You can have people observing birds or all kinds of stuff. We tend to focus on material that archives and special collections, sometimes museum archives tend to have, right? So textual records generally. We do think that the lessons we've learned are more broadly applicable, but we're going to focus on basically scanned documents.
Yeah.
Yeah. So our platform lets people see an image of a page and transcribe the text from that page into a place to type, right? So you've got an image, you got a place to type. We try to keep the technology as simple as possible for users because transcribing text, reading text, that's hard enough. That's a really difficult process. So we don't want to kind of clutter it up with a lot of tech. We've seen a lot of successful projects over the last few years. Here's a handful of the organizations that we've hosted projects for. And today we're going to be talking about effective crowdsourcing. So what is effective crowdsourcing? In my opinion, effective crowdsourcing is a collaboration between a memory institution and the public. The goal is deep public engagement with special collections and archives, and deep, massive metadata creation or enhancement. So when I say deep engagement, most organizations nowadays have a social media presence that stuff like Instagram accounts, Facebook pages, that lets them expose their material really broadly to the general public, which is wonderful, right? This is a really exciting time to be working with special collections and archives. One of the challenges about social media's engagement is that it's a broad engagement, but it's a very shallow engagement. Oftentimes, the only way for people to react is by hitting a like button, right? It doesn't allow members of the public to share their own expertise and their passion and their subject matter knowledge, right, with your institution. In addition to being about this kind of deeper engagement, crowdsourcing is also about improving metadata for digitized assets in ways that require massive human interpretation. And that doesn't mean massive numbers of humans or massive amounts of material. Really, what we're talking about is the kinds of human thinking that libraries and archive staff would love to do, but it's really not within the resources or oftentimes the mandate of an archivist who's staring at a hallway full of unprocessed boxes to look at something that's already been scanned online and transcribe that material, right? It's just not a great priority.
But when we talk about kind of that deep engagement, it doesn't have to involve a ton of text. The image on the screen is actually from the Chicago Botanic library, and you'll see there's not a lot of writing, but the writing that's there requires such deep expert knowledge. It's about orchids. There's a lot of Latin species names. There's also a lot of German. So like the layers of things you have to know to be able to help, interpret and make this particular really cool, beautiful document more accessible to the public is this kind of deep engagement that it turns out volunteers actually really love to do, because someone who has all these skills wants to engage with their passions and their hobbies.
So speaking of volunteers working with archival staff is really important. Volunteers cannot really replace archival staff. You cannot run a crowdsourcing project and assume that the public is going to do your work for you, or that you can, that an organization can fire all their librarians and archivists, right? That just does not work, right? This is a collaboration that requires members of the public, these volunteers, and staff, right?
Right.
There's labor involved.
We have this cute picture of a puppy here because our standing joke is that crowdsourcing is not free as in speech or free as in beer, but free as in puppy. The puppy's free, but you have to take care of it. You have to do a lot of work. It needs some supplies. So the volunteers that are participating in these projects don't like being ignored. They don't like having their work lost. They're really uncomfortable with unclear directions and instructions. They're doing something that they feel is meaningful, and they're engaging with you and your institution. Therefore, you need to reciprocate and make sure that their work is meaningful and engage with them. So we're going to talk a lot about the work that goes into successful crowdsourcing projects. So let's start with volunteers, because if you don't have volunteers, you're not going to have a successful crowdsourcing project, right? I used to have just one slide on this, but now I have 4 because volunteers are so important to crowdsourcing projects. So this is a snapshot of a week on FromThePage from this past summer. This was right after we hit our 2 millionth page transcribed. And over that week, we had about 450 volunteers working on the platform. When we look across a year, we have about 5,000. And we want that magic to happen for you. We want you to post your material on FromThePage and for one of these volunteers to find it and start working on it. We're working very hard to give volunteers ways to find the things that they're interested in and to find active, well-managed projects. It isn't always easy. So we do send out a monthly newsletter that features our new projects, but we also suggest that you work to recruit volunteers, because what we found is that your most dedicated volunteers are often the ones with ties to your location, to your institution, to your material, or to the topics of your material. So there's lots of different ways to find volunteers, and we are happy to help you find them too. So this is a picture of some of Library of Virginia's volunteers at their annual Transcribiversary. I love how diverse they are in age and race, and probably the thing they have in common is they're probably all in Virginia, and many of them are close to Richmond. They're students, so just lots of different types of volunteers. One of the things you should do is start thinking, when you're thinking about a project like this, where can we find volunteers? Who will they be? Are kind of the stock volunteers on FromThePage the right ones for you? Do you have volunteers that already work with your institution who might like a deeper way to engage? One thing that we found is, as many volunteers are retirees, and as they age, often they have considerations that keep them at home more. Either they're caring for a loved one, or they can no longer drive, or they have health concerns. But online volunteering, like with FromThePage, is something that they really love to do, because it kind of overcomes some of the kind of tactical barriers to what they have been doing in the past, right? Do you know people who are local who are interested? Maybe you have local history material, and your local history societies or your local genealogists would, trust me, love to work with you on this. So lots of different ways to think about finding volunteers. Maybe you're deep on a particular subject matter, and you can reach out to communities around the world on that subject matter. So one of our early projects was with the Yaquina Head lighthouses. They had lighthouse keepers logs from decades, and they were able to engage with lighthouse fans. It turns out there are people who are super enthusiastic about lighthouses, and they had those people virtually come in and work on transcribing. When you think about volunteers, you can also think about what material has been most popular with your patrons and think about why it's popular. This image is a volunteer with the Missouri State Archives, and she's holding her grandfather's birth certificates. Genealogists love projects with lots of names and vital information, even if the material is not as engaging on the surface as diaries or letters. We've seen some very successful projects run with heritage organizations, especially the DAR. I actually noticed we had a number of people signed up from the DAR in this webinar, so hopefully you're here.
Y'all are amazing.
Yes.
Yes.
The last thing to realize is that crowdsourcing is something you are probably not familiar with, but it's something your volunteers may not be familiar with either. It's a bit intimidating, right? So if you think through how you can make it easier for them, that puts you in a good mindset for working with your volunteers. And what we see is that volunteers and transcribers get really into this type of work. It's very fun and engaging. The image on the screen represents the most active transcribers on 3 different projects: the Indiana Archives, the Library of Virginia, and the California State Library. What you see here is that while the bulk of their active transcribers were independent, they only worked on their project, there were overlaps. There are volunteers who go from project to project. We have one volunteer who maybe once a month will scroll through our list of projects looking for something she hasn't worked on, and she'll hop in and try something new. It's fascinating. Sometimes she finds something she's really interested in and goes deep and contributes a lot, because she's one of these 30 to 40 hour a week sort of volunteers. And sometimes she does a page or 2 and moves on. The power is kind of with the volunteer, right?
So how do you figure out what material is most appropriate for a successful crowdsourcing project? Volunteers are motivated by a lot of things. Not every volunteer is motivated by the same thing. So we recommend that you choose material that can tell a good story, provide an immersive experience, or contains local history or genealogical information. One thing to look for is material that tells good stories. If you get started reading a diary, you want to turn the page and find out what happens next. Letters and diaries are great for this. Volunteers build a connection with the story, and they want to know what's going on. This example is from an email that I received on a project that I run, where somebody from actually a totally different continent was working on a agricultural diary from Virginia, and makes her, shares her own observations, but she also wants to know what is going on with one of the people the diarist is writing about, right? What is the matter with Josie? Sad to say, Josie had stomach cancer and would die in a few months. But that kind of connection is really powerful. Letters and diaries provide an immersive experience for the people transcribing them, but non-narrative material can work too. When the Alabama State Archives indexed some World War I service cards from their state, the collections themselves were organized by county, right? So you would get, as a volunteer, coffee county surnames A through B, right? So the volunteers working with these got a snapshot of a county, often their county or the county that their family was from, in 1918, as they're going through and indexing each service member's name, how old they were, where they enlisted, what branch they were in, right? They're seeing what's going on in this one location, and it's very immersive. You can also be successful with material that has a lot of local history. The Indianapolis Public Library ran a project transcribing records from Indianapolis public schools. These records are really dry. Lists of names of students and parents, and how many there were. It was really not that interesting, but it's a genealogist's gold mine, because when a family lived in a particular place and what their household looked like at the time. Volunteers understand that and value it.
We also go back.
Yeah, so I skipped one.
No, you didn't.
Okay.
We also find that if you can give your volunteers a sense of accomplishment, that's very motivating. I think we're all motivated by checking things off a list. So some of the World War I service card projects were very successful. And I think part of it was you had a single card. And like Alabama, for instance, only collected about 5 fields from each card. So a transcriber could get a lot done. We all like getting stuff done, and that feeling of accomplishment kept them coming back. That particular project was 111,000 World War I service cards, and they transcribed them all in 2.5 months. Because their material hit so many of these points. They had such great relationships with their local genealogy and history organizations. Their material was organized by location. People felt very accomplished. It was meaningful from a genealogical point of view. You could go deep in a particular, county. All of these things contributed to making their project really successful.
Okay, so now you've identified the material you want to run a project on. What next? Well, the next thing to do is to define the task. For transcription projects, that means giving people instructions on how to transcribe. And I've got to say, the minute that anybody encounters a word that's unclear to read, or they hit an abbreviation or a spelling that's non-standard, they're going to have questions. So we encourage projects to develop transcription conventions that give instructions for volunteers about what to do when they hit these things. We actually show these conventions on the transcription screen itself. It's right underneath the place that volunteers are typing into, so they could just scroll down and read that if they run into problems. This example is from the Wisconsin Historical Society that has great documentation. One of the things that we'd recommend is that you transcribe a couple of example pages and upload those as a separate section. So you can link to them, people can look at those as an example, and some people who don't want to read the instructions will look at those examples. As you're doing these example pages, that's a great opportunity for you to experience the process itself, realize what kind of issues you're running into, and develop those transcription conventions further. It's an iterative process. You can always go back and add things as people ask new questions or they hit something new that they haven't encountered before. As you're developing these conventions, if you can grab a handful of staff members or family members or friends or something, just go grab someone, ask them to transcribe a page and listen to the questions that they ask you. That gives you a great opportunity to update your conventions and your examples with real world situations. So when you're kicking off a project, we talk about bringing people together to have, to develop these conventions, but it's also great to have a transcribe-a-thon. There are ways to get people over the hump of transcribing material, but there are also good ways to do outreach. The Library of Virginia does a transcribe-a-thon every month, but you don't have to do that. They actually do two, one in person and one online.
They have a staff.
Yeah.
It's dedicated to this.
Right. You can launch a transcribe-a-thon at the very beginning of a project and bring in the people who you think might be leaders within their field or within their communities. So you bring in people who are active in genealogy organizations or local history societies to do the transcribe-a-thon in person. It lets you give some hand-on instruction to people, get them over the discomfort of what am I doing? Man, I'm not used to reading wills. What does this language mean? Is the work I'm doing good enough? Right? All these kinds of questions, right? So people emerge from transcribe-a-thons with confidence and with enthusiasm and expertise, and they can bring that back to their own communities and enlist other people and encourage other people to join in. They can be an event that local media likes to highlight. They're a great way to get the word out. The New Orleans Jazz Museum did a transcribe-a-thon working with French language documents from colonial New Orleans, and you can see a post about it. But what's interesting to me is that the post is not by the New Orleans Jazz Museum, it's by the French department at Tulane saying, hey, come check this out. If you want to improve your French or work on colonial French, you could go do this. On the right-hand side, you see somebody tweeting about their own experience from an in-person transcribe-a-thon saying, check it out, how cool this is. I'm learning how to work on Latin manuscripts, right? This is really fun. You can do remote transcribe-a-thons. The communication barrier is higher, but a video conference kickoff to walk volunteers through the project can work. And one of the ways we've seen this work especially well is when it's attached to an online event like a conference. This was a transcribe-a-thon that happened in parallel with a conference held by the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies. So they held a virtual conference, and while that was going on, they also ran this transcribe-a-thon in which people were working on a document that had never been published. By the end of the conference, they were able to they had the whole thing transcribed, edited, and were ready to publish. Very cool.
So you don't have to do a transcribe-a-thon. We just think they're really great ways to kind of start a project and get a lot of attention to it at the beginning. But you should definitely plan on doing some outreach and some marketing. If you have existing outreach venues, mailing lists, newsletters, social media accounts, you should use those and mention and push and link to your project. If you have a physical location, you can do handouts at a checkout desk or as you walk out the door. You can also look for subject matter enthusiast communities, people who'd be interested in the material, but who might not be local. On Facebook, or you'll find groups on different topics. Can find Twitter accounts. Sometimes there's even magazines. So we have a whole post that we'll include in the follow-up email on how to find organizations who might be interested in a particular subject. But you probably know this too, because it's your material. It's your popular material often, right? We've also seen local news channels, both print and television, pick up these projects because they're interesting, they're visual, you have cool old documents, you have people that they can come take pictures of, and they're feel-good stories. They're a way for the local community to contribute to your mission of preserving memories. So this is a screenshot from some local TV coverage of the project by the Seattle Municipal Archives. This is the archivist Jeannie Fisher who runs that archive. So I just think it's such a pretty
And you can see what good TV this
Yeah.
makes, right? It's old books and an office and ways for viewers to contribute to something positive.
Right. We've also seen really good uptake by newspapers. When the North Carolina State Archives launched their Colonial Court Records project, they had coverage in 2 large newspapers. It happened around the holidays, so slow news days, and it brought in a lot of interested volunteers. Those days were actually the highest number of visits to FromThePage's website that year. Yeah. Once you kick off your project and you're starting to get volunteers working on it, you need to figure out how to keep them engaged. It's not unusual for volunteers to drop by, transcribe a page, and you may never see them again. We have a couple of suggestions for keeping these volunteers or more of these volunteers engaged, because the more you can keep, the more you'll accomplish and faster. So the first thing that we suggest is that you welcome new users. So we send out a note to you every night telling you what's gone on in your collections the previous day. So you'll get something like a screenshot at the bottom, which shows you all of your recent activity, who joined your project, what's happened. You can also go into your collaborator tab and see people who joined, and you can grab their email addresses if they've opted in and send them a stock email telling them what the project is, what the purpose is. Volunteers really like purpose, and what the transcribed material is going to be used for. If you have any training materials, you can link to your help tab, to your transcription conventions, to some of the videos we have on YouTube, and include how to contact you. They might want to ask you questions or to share something they found, or to see if they can bring in a group of 20 people to help you transcribe, and all of those things you'll want them to be able to find you. So make it easy. In addition to welcoming new users, you should respond to questions and comments on your project. That nightly email will also include those questions and comments from your collaborators. And we talk about this and it sounds kind of onerous, but it's usually not that bad. You have 1 or 2 new people a day. If you're really lucky, you'll have maybe 1 comment every 3 days, things like that.
And not every comment is going to require you to swoop in, drop everything you're doing, and go respond. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you see comments from your collaborators. That's part of one of those nightly emails, and it's from a project that I run. And you see one day I got, a whole bunch of comments from one particular user who is sharing her expertise, right? She's looking at recipes in this diary. She's looking at people's names and is describing what they are. What's important there is to say thank you. It's, I don't have to stop everything and go do some research. It is important, though, to respond, especially when people have questions. So if you look on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the on page comment thread about one particular page, which you see, this is the Yaquina Head Lighthouses project Sara was talking about earlier, a volunteer named Olivia who says, you know, there's a lot of activity around a hack. They clean it, they paint it, they varnish it. What is a hack? So this is a volunteer who's run into a difficult term and is asking a question. And the people running the project, the Friends of the Lighthouses, respond immediately, and they say, we have no idea. And the thing about this that I love is that this is absolutely a best practice, because when they responded, she got an email and she knows that there's somebody on the other end of the line, that they're being listened to. The next day they come back and figure out, yes, this is what I have to do.
A hack is actually a hack boat. We recommend that you include your contact information. So we have a footer that shows up on every page of your project. So this is an example from the LA County Library, and they link to their Facebook, and here's where they are on Twitter and Instagram. And that questions, contact us, is actually a mail to form where they can email them if they have questions. Because one of the things that we find is we really, really love people asking questions on the page, because it keeps the discussion centered around the text, especially if you have questions about what does this say or what am I supposed to do with this particular weird thing that shows up, because we know there's always weird things. But not everyone is comfortable asking questions in public, looking stupid in public. So giving them some other venues to engage with you is nice. And again, this isn't going to flood your inbox. It just makes you more accessible to your volunteers. The other thing that we love and recommend is sending a newsletter. It doesn't have to be complicated or big, and you don't have to do it that often, once a week, once a month, once a quarter, when you need to juice your project and get it restarted. All of those things are okay. Our attitude is that something is better than nothing, and you can pull your collaborator emails from your collaborators tab. And we have some examples of what good newsletters often include. Their milestones for volunteers, or this is the cool thing we found in the process of doing this project, or here's how this is being used by researchers. All of those are great, reasons to send a note to your volunteers. And it's a way to make them feel like they're part of something successful. So, we feel like we all, as kind of institutions, benefit from the work done by volunteers, but the entire historical community benefits from increased public awareness and appreciation for what archives do. Crowdsourcing invites citizens to join in that work. It gives them a sense of responsibility for the past that we all share, a direct and personal connection to the people who made that past, and a desire to support and protect the institutions that preserve it. So I feel like these projects have bigger purpose, right? And they're a way to really take your holdings and the knowledge in your institutions and spread them into the public in a really deep way. So that's really all the formal presentation we have for you today. But if you're even the littlest bit inspired, I encourage you to act on that energy. We offer quick start calls where you bring about 200 pages of material, PDFs or images, and we'll work together to get your project configured and launched. No strings attached, really, and we include all of those new projects in our monthly transcriber newsletter. So you can see the magic of crowdsourcing. You can see how little work it takes to get started, and you can start imagining how to make it part of your archives work. That link will be in the email that we send out tomorrow or Monday.
So that finishes up our presentation. So we'd like to open up the kind of floor for discussion. So feel free to type any questions or comments in the chat. We have a small enough group today that I feel like if someone wants to, they could just probably unmute themselves and ask questions or make comments.
Yeah, and we'll show you around some of the From the Page stuff in just a minute too, but we want to
make sure people have a chance to ask questions.
hate the silence. I'm not good with big spots of silence.
I read that today is the anniversary of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, so I'm tempted to ask Bueller.
No. Let's go ahead and share screen and oh yeah, and show some things off.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen and we're just going to do a quick and informal live demo of how FromThePage as a platform works, primarily from the end user perspective, the volunteer perspective. But if there's time and interest, we'll get into kind of, what the back end looks like for people running their own projects. And please, interrupt at any time, ask questions, add things to the chat.
So there's actually a question in the chat already.
Already, okay.
What does it says, what is the preparation involved on our side? So digitized images, imported or uploaded to FromThePage, transcribe say 2 or 3 pages and tweak our default transcription conventions to suit what you need. We try to have a good set of defaults, but they're not always, sometimes everyone's material is slightly different, right? We are happy to hop on calls and help you kind of think through this as well. Once you do that and it's up and the project is marked public, we will include it in our monthly transcriber newsletter. So sometimes you have to wait, kind of a month to hit that, kind of depending on where you are in our cycle. But you can start promoting it immediately. And as people start working on it, it starts bubbling up to our activity feeds. And we have some volunteers who really watch those and engage with it. So people will, stumble across your project and work on it, especially if it's well described and well titled. And that's really it. And then read the emails that come in and respond to questions. Ideally welcome people as they join your project, but really respond to questions is the most important one there.
Okay, shall we transcribe the page?
That page looks very long. You can do a little bit of it.
Okay, let's do part of the page. In fact, let's change this layout. This is kind of a tiny page, so something so we can see a little bit better.
So this is a project from the Queens University Archive in Toronto, and it looks like a diary from 1899.
I'm just going to save right there. I'm not sure employ is the right word. And I got a rose wrong as well, didn't I?
Yeah.
I think so. We can zoom in if we're having problems, but
I think that's what the word says.
Okay, I employ most of the day writing letters. Okay, so I'm going to hit save here, but I'm not going to hit done because we are not done with this. This is still in an incomplete status. One of the things that we'd like to point out is that as people are working on projects, we store a complete version history of everything they've done. That is publicly visible. So if we take a look at this, the versions tab, we can see all of my changes. Queens uploaded in their page, and of course there's no transcript involved. We can then see my initial attempt to transcribe the first few lines, and then we can see there's a little bit more in which we got rid of that errant P, that typo, and then added the writing letters.
So that's always good for just kind of knowing what's happening on a page. We actually created this for some classroom uses. There are some classrooms that use this. They have one student transcribe, and then they have another student review and edit, and you can kind of see who did what using that version screen. Yeah, thanks, Joyce. We're from Texas. Our Canada geography is not as good as it
It's
used to be.
quite all right. Yeah, it's quite all right.
So Sarah mentioned the activity feeds. So we should probably point that out. As people work, their work is public to anyone who can see the project. And so you can see that there is a kind of an activity feed of everything that's happened recently. So I can go in and I can see, all right, people can see, okay, well, here's what Ben did, but I can come in and I can see what the volunteer Kufu did, and take a look at their work, and either read the page, read the whole document, or read the individual page that they were working on. One of the other things that they are doing in this project is they're using markup, right, to indicate, oh, this is struck out. This is not actually December 28th.
That's interesting that they're doing that. You can enable some buttons for things like that, and Queens hasn't, so they're doing that by hand.
Yeah, someone is typing it in by hand. That's very impressive. And there's even underlines. Martin lies. Martin is a liar anyway. Wow. Wow. Okay, drama. Okay. As people work on projects, they can add notes. So we talked about the transcription conventions. We talked about the notes. The transcription conventions are at the very bottom of the screen. And if people have questions, they can add notes here as well.
You want to address Joyce's question?
Yeah, so Joyce asks whether the system accommodates more than one volunteer transcribing the same text to get a variety of interpretations, or is that more trouble than it may be worth? So, generally speaking, only one person works on a page at a time. So if I were to go in and edit this page that the user Kufu was on, I would see, if they were actively editing it, I would see a little warning sign that says, hey, this page is being edited by another user. More generally, though, we do not do without some extra work on the part of the project owners. We don't follow a model in which multiple people independently transcribe the same text. And it's not because that's a bad model for transcription to get their different interpretations. It's because the results are often unusable, because those have to be merged and compared by someone. And that is a very, very difficult problem when you're dealing with an entire page of text. You end up seeing that, okay, well, this person transcribed putting 2 spaces after every period, and this person just put 1 space after a period, and all these kinds of almost incidental differences that aren't the concrete differences. So instead, what we like to follow is
Wikipedia's model of collaborative knowledge creation. This idea that Kufu can come and transcribe this page, and then Ben could come and review and read what Kufu did. And, especially if there's a note or a comment on the bottom, I couldn't figure out line 6 is, what's the name there? I don't know. And we do see that with some projects, that the collaborators get really engaged, helping each other figure out hard to find things. And they'll go do research in third-party systems like census lists and things like that to figure out names and locations. So right, that's our model, is collaborative knowledge creation rather than multi-track transcription.
So there's a question that Anne asks about the review process with the review checkbox. So there's really 2 pieces of that. There's how does a transcription get flagged as needing review? And then there's who does the reviewing. So the way that this project at Queens is configured, and it can vary from project to project, they are using what we call optional review, in which an end user who's transcribing something can say, hey, I'm uncertain about this. This page needs review. Please help me out. And then anyone who has access to the project can click on pages that need review. They can see all the pages that have been flagged as needing review, and then dive in and spot check them, proofread them, review them as appropriate. Now, other projects may have different quality needs, and they may have different labor resources associated with those quality needs.
Because people are happy to transcribe. Reviewing takes more dedicated volunteers. It's actually where we've seen some of the heritage organizations like the DAR play an amazing role, is because they're willing and they understand the need for quality, and they're willing to do review work as well as transcription work.
So as I mentioned, this Queens project is using kind of the lowest level of review and quality control and also the lowest labor. Other projects have configured their project so that every page is automatically flagged as needing review. And then there's two levels of that. One variation is that anyone who has access to the project can review and approve a page. The higher level is that only a restricted set of users, whether they be staff members or volunteers, are allowed to review and approve pages.
And then we have a review dashboard that tries to point you to the things that most need review based on statistics. So if a transcriber has only worked on one page, we really think that page should be reviewed because they haven't gotten into the groove of doing a lot of things. If a transcriber's pages have a lot of revisions by other people, then we think you should look at the rest of the pages that transcriber did. And so you can start kind of building statistics that help you see maybe which documents and which transcribers you should really pay a lot more attention to. So that's one of the other things that we do to try to make this easier.
So Christopher has what I'm going to say called two questions. One is about pricing. And then the other one is about transcribing and then translating.
I'm gonna get pricing up to drop into the.
So,
Sorry, you keep talking.
Yeah. Why don't I get the pricing?
Okay. We're gonna drop our pricing page into the chat. It hopefully is clear. Mostly is based on, do you have one project or more than one project? And then how many pages do you have? Up to 10,000, up to 50,000. Up to 100,000. And we're happy to chat, and there's ways to chat with us. Send us an email. There's a chat at the bottom of the screen once you have an account created to kind of walk you through any of that.
So let's talk a little bit about translation. The translation is a separate process. And so this is an example in which we are transcribing a Middle English document. We're actually doing OCR correction on it. And then after correcting the document, so we can see, all right, well, we're transcribing all this, we're correcting it. We have the option in this case to translate it, and we're translating it into modern English. The person doing this has the option of switching between the transcription and the image, which is useful in cases, I think, especially in the case of German, where lots of documents before World War II are written in a handwriting style that is not very often used and is not really accessible to modern readers. You might have somebody who's in Germany who's older and doesn't have a lot of English do the transcription side of things, and then somebody else do a translation into English from their transcription.
We will say that the vast majority of our volunteers work on English language documents. We do have a handful that know German, but you're going to have to do a lot of work to bring volunteers to the platform.
That said, the platform is internationalized, and if we want to, we can switch the interface to German. We do support German, English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese for interface languages, and in terms of the language of the text, we support almost everything. So there's a question about the format of the final product. Can all the pages from one document be merged into a Word doc without cutting and pasting? The answer to that is yes. So it may be a little difficult for me to demo because I might have to switch to different screens, but here's an example of a project that I run. You can see there's about 12 individual pages. We have a lot of different export formats. We have about 24. Many of them are highly technical, but there are a handful that are actually accessible for people. So if I want to, I can ask for a Microsoft Word download, and that is going to create something that opens in a different window, which I have to share. Let me see if I can do that. So that did an export, and that is opened in Word or WordPad, and you can see that here are all the pages all stitched together, right? So we do support exports in Word, or PDF at the document level, as well as page by page.
I don't think we actually do Word page by page, but we have text page by page and why don't you show the export tab as well? You can share your screen, go back
Sure.
from the page, just to get a feel for all the possible. So what Ben started on was kind of the document level download page, but at the project level, you can export in bulk. And you can,
Yeah, so you can export every document as HTML, plain text, TEIXML, IIIF. If there's tabular information, you can extract that as a spreadsheet. And then, as we said, we have a lot of other export formats that works. We also have a API that many libraries have used to integrate with their own systems. So every night, fresh transcriptions are pulled over into their own digital library systems.
what other questions do we have? Is it possible to output the project when transcription is finished, or is expected to live in perpetuity on your platform? You can do both. So the way we look at completed projects, we want you to get stuff out and use it in your own systems. But you can also make your project read only on from the page or leave it active, either one, and keep it available that way. If you make it read only, we don't actually charge you. That doesn't count against your subscription. In fact, if you have a subscription for a single project and you get the project done, we can make your account inactive and leave your material up. We don't make any guarantees, but it's still there and you can pull it out at any time too.
So there's a question from
Chris
asking about the system supporting awarding digital badges. So that touches on gamification, which in cultural heritage crowdsourcing is a difficult subject. It is something that we have tried to avoid as much as possible because we found that the highest quality work and the most complete engagement comes from people who are intrinsically motivated by, transcribing these documents, being immersed in them. The closest we come to gamification is that there is a leaderboard. We hide it kind of at the bottom of a statistics tab, but you can see the people who are transcribing, reviewing, editing. So there's a little bit there.
And we're not 100% opposed to kind of participation badges. We haven't built any of that. This is actually the first time this has come up. So we're happy to talk more, but
yeah. Did you cover the transcription?
I did that.
Okay.
Is there any questions we missed? Just to make sure, I feel like we can open that a little bit bigger. There's this whole German language side conversation.
Yay, convention lift. I love correct. Review system. Yeah, okay. I think we're good. Okay, so not every document is a letter or diary that is narrative. Particularly government archives have a lot of structured fields. And so for those projects, we can support people configuring the documents, configuring the transcription task to support fields. So this is an example at the Library of Virginia. They're using what's called field-based transcription to take these separation notices and create a database from them. So they've said, here are the fields that we want to collect from this document, and they're asking volunteers to type them all in. At the end, this could be exported as Microsoft Word or something like that, but really they're going to want to pull these out as a spreadsheet to use to update their own databases. A variant on that is for documents like this. This is the can you describe what these are?
Yes, this is a petition for women's suffrage in Sweden. And they had books. If you go look at the landing page for this project, it's a picture of the woman who spearheaded it and books up to her chin of all of the women who signed this petition. Oh, yeah. Sorry, not up to her chin, over her head.
Over her head. Yeah. Yes.
And so, this project is not particularly useful in full text format because you'll have names that, if you were looking for Mary Smith, you could have a Smith and a Mary and they won't be the same person. But if you do it as a spreadsheet, which is what this one was done, you want to go to the transcribe tab.
And I just wanted to point out that these pages were sent out to every county and every place. So land's name, Ort's place, that means that it's really easy to target the appropriate volunteers for them to find the material that might mention their ancestors or their localities. So how this project is configured, it is a variation of our field-based transcription, which is spreadsheet-based. So you can see here, they've configured these fields for the county name and the place name and page number at the top. Those are things that apply to every record on this page, but then the actual names, titles, and occupations and addresses they have for as spreadsheets, right? So they've got forename, aftername, title, work, address, and then finally at the bottom, they have a handful of footer fields, right? So they'll be able to export this whole thing as a spreadsheet to use to create a findable database for all of these women. At this point, they're up over 200,000 names of women that they have identified who signed these petitions.
So very cool. People also use this form-based transcription to describe photographs. Photograph identification as a crowdsourcing task is hard because if you kind of just drop a whole bunch of stuff and ask the general public to identify things, it's kind of too broad. People overmatch. But if you can do a limited set of photographs, like the Indianapolis Public Library did, had a collection of parks photographs, and they didn't know which park the photographs were from. And they asked people to select from a drop-down list, which park was this and why they thought so. And we had really fascinating material coming out of that because people were putting in things like links to Google Street View showing where the photo was taken and why this wasn't a park or it was a park or what park it was near or things like that. So it's possible to do that sort of work as well. You can also do metadata around documents, images of photographs or of things, right?
So I think we're approaching the end of our hour. So the last thing that we want to leave you with is kind of a sneak preview of some new features that we've been developing. This is a new feature called the AI Assistant, AI Assist. So this is a document from Victorian era Australia. We have taken the document and we have run it against a AI-based transcription engine, which is going to produce a lot of errors, but we want to figure out if there's ways that we can use its output to help volunteers. So perhaps a volunteer is having trouble reading this word. They can click AI Assist and they can see, well, here is what the AI transcribed this as. This is pretty good, actually, in this case. There's some of them that are not so hot, but it is a way that we hope will help people, especially younger people who are not as familiar with handwriting, get enough context that they can accurately transcribe material. We did a big webinar about this last month, and the recording is online. If anyone's interested, we can send it to you.
And this isn't generally available yet. We're working with identifying some development partners to kind of help give us feedback on it. So
right. So it's another works with Spanish too. Yay!
Let's see, there's a question. Our project is a diary that includes clippings, photos, and other ephemera. Is there a way to accommodate image descriptions within a transcription? That's the sort of thing we should kind of talk about in a separate call and actually look at your material. There's lots of ways it could be done, and we should just think through what the trade-offs are and what's the right one that's kind of easiest for volunteers and most useful for the output that you need.
And we're always happy to jump on a call and do what we call a deep dive, where we just stare at a document together and figure out what could be done with it, what the options are.
Yeah. And sometimes those options are go use something else. So we're happy to tell you what we think. Do we provide volunteers with any tutorials around reading, writing longhand script? So we have a YouTube channel where we post like all of our webinars and things. And then we've also pulled in a handful of videos that other people have done on things like paleography. So like Library of Virginia did a very popular one a year or two ago that's on that list. So I can, we can definitely send you can go look through that and look for things that are appropriate for your particular material, because we run things from
Yes.
medieval through
Right.
the 1960s. So it's not all going to
Yes,
be the same thing.
This has been the real challenge, is that, there is no general purpose. How do you read script, right? It depends on the script, and it depends on what you're doing. And so, I mean, we've even seen the Alabama Department of Archives and History is working, transcribing their state Supreme Court records right now. And they provide people with links out to glossaries of legal terms, because their documents are full of legal terms, and I can't make heads or tails out of the legal terms themselves, right? And that's not something that everyone needs. It's not something the diaries need, for example.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we want to be respectful of your time. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for some amazing questions.
Yeah, we love
That
it
was
when
really,
you
really
engage
great.
like that. It makes
Yes.
us real great.
Yeah.
So there'll be a follow-up email. Please think about doing a trial project and pulling in some of your own material and just see how it looks and how it works.